What's the biggest mistake people make when trying to build muscle?
I think that the biggest mistake that people make is that people will typically have multiple goals, and the average person always wants to look a little bit leaner, even when building muscle is one of their um, main focuses. And I think the biggest issue that most people have is they focus most on losing the body fat first instead of actually valuing building strength and building lean muscle. And I think that unfortunately this puts them behind in the long run from actually progressing to where they want to be. And certainly, if you have obesity in play, if you're a man with significantly more than 20% body fat, if you are a woman with significantly more than 30% body fat, yes, losing body fat is probably one of the smartest things. But if we're talking about having the best performance, having the best physique, having the best longevity and quality of life, building lean muscle should probably be a priority rather than consistently focusing on losing body fat. And when we look at it, in the research, I mean, starting in your 30s, people lose 3 to 8% of their total muscle mass each decade. It ramps up a little bit in your 40s, and then once you hit your 60s, it ramps up very significantly. And so, sarcopenia, the loss of muscle that's related with aging, is an extremely massive problem that so many people have. And I think that if we value building lean muscle and maybe put some of that body fat loss goal on the back burner, at least for a time, we will finally get to the goals that we want to achieve and do it in the best, healthiest way possible. I think that the issue here is that we need to learn to put off some of those other goals that we have, realizing that the process to get to where we want to be is probably a little bit different than we think.
And what do you think people mess up that causes them wanting to lose fat before building muscle to be that big mistake?
I think that the main issue is that people don't really understand the full benefits that building muscle brings. And I know that people say, yes, to have that athletic physique, I know that I need muscle. I really want to build it. But emotionally and mentally, I'll just feel better if I lose a bit of body fat first. And I think that that's perfectly fine. I think that trying to go all in, using the scale as our only sign of success, having to see that before and after photo immediately is missing the forest for the trees or putting the cart before the horse. I think that once we start to value the benefits that building lean muscle brings, we can start to see some of these signs of progress that aren't necessarily just that mirror or progress photo transformation. And when I talk about this type of thing, I like to point out all of the different benefits that this can bring you, because maybe if we realize the full scope of benefits that this brings, we can become a little bit more comfortable in the process and finally build that lean muscle, finally get off that diet roller coaster. Because if we do build that muscle, it will make it easier to get that physique that you're looking for, to burn the body fat later when we go all in on a cut. And so I like to bring up a lot of the benefits to building skeletal muscle and strength that are not age related, that are not related necessarily to cardiovascular health. These are things that are all independent of some of these other variables that can greatly improve our life and make things a lot better for us in the long run. Building lean muscle, building strength is probably the best thing that we can possibly do for injury risk reduction. If you ask the average person, what do I do to reduce injuries? Most people will say things like stretch. When we look at the research, stretching reduces injury risk anywhere between 0 and 4%. If we look at strength training, it's upwards of 69%. And so we have this massive benefit here that people are not really taking advantage of. I mean, it improves bone health. It boosts mood and energy. It improves brain and cardiovascular health. It boosts our ability to recover. And even if body fat loss is our main goal, we can start to value some of the things that this skeletal muscle mass and weight training brings to the equation. When we exercise, we release protein called myokines, and this improves mood, cardiovascular, and brain health. It also releases things called MIR1. It is genetic material. Now, MIR1 is a very interesting topic because when it is in skeletal muscle tissue, it actually blocks the ability to build lean muscle. So by weight training, by exercising, we release that from the skeletal muscle tissue. It unlocks muscle building. But what's really cool, especially for people that are looking to lose body fat, is that what this then does is it goes to adjacent fat cells and it upregulates lipolysis. So not only do we unlock muscle building, we increase the rate of body fat loss. On top of that, it acts as a storage medium for glucose. It's a metabolic sink. And so people that are looking to eat some more carbs, well, you've got some more tissue beyond fat cells, beyond adipose tissue that glucose can be stored in. So it gives you the ability to enjoy things like pizza, enjoy things like bagels, and not have to worry about it quite as much from a body fat accrual standpoint. So we have all of these benefits that can come into play, even in this goal of losing body fat. But we have to value actually building that lean muscle first before we can see those benefits. So by talking about these types of things, we can educate people and make it a little bit easier to go on this journey where we spend some significant amounts of time building that lean muscle.
And I know we all make mistakes in the gym, especially when we're getting started. I've made some. I'm sure you've made some as well. If you were to start over in the gym today with the goal of building muscle, what would you do differently?
Well, first, I would get a coach. And the reason that I would get a coach is because people don't know what they don't know. And there's nothing wrong with that. You're not spending your entire lives reading, hypertrophy research. You're not spending all of your lives reading health research. And so by getting that person, they act as a GPS system that can prevent you from going off track. The most important thing I feel that people don't really understand when they're getting into a lean muscle and strength building journey is how critical it is to focus on intensity when you're building lean muscle and strength. When we take our exercises, each working set, close to failure, that's when we actually cause the stimulus to build that lean muscle and strength that we're looking to achieve. When we look at the research, people are usually about 5 reps off from failure when they think they're at failure. And so when I'm a person that is starting out, or when I'm working with people that are starting out, I really emphasize once we get past that stage where they're feeling comfortable with the movement itself, the form itself for an exercise, we start to emphasize intensity and working those working sets closer to failure. Because the reality of the situation is when most people go into exercise, what they're doing is they're kind of going through the motions. They feel like they're working really hard and they're probably getting to about 80-85%. But when they understand that really pushing in proximity to failure, 1, 2, 3 reps short of failure, is what is necessary to continue progressing over time, we actually start to see a lot more benefits from the strength training itself. And it's less you're just wasting time getting in there and doing volume that is not necessarily producing the effects that you want, and more actually producing what we're trying to achieve. And so I think that what we really need to focus on once you have a program that provides the adequate volume and exercises that you need is getting that intensity in play.
And when it comes to like lies that people believe about muscle growth, what do you think that is one thing somebody used to believe about muscle growth that you think now is complete BS?
There's a ton there. The anabolic window is one that comes up a lot. The idea that we have to have a large protein serving within 30 minutes of weight training. And if we don't do that, we're essentially wasting the progress that we had. We initially thought that this was the case, and there is not necessarily a problem in doing this. It's not a negative if you get a protein serving soon after weight training. But the more that research started to advance, the more we realized that this is more of an anabolic barn door than it is an anabolic window. Obviously, total daily intakes matter far more than anything else. And so if you're struggling to get in total daily protein needs, focus on that first in whatever way is best for you. But once you find consistency in that, you can realize that the anabolic window is more like a 6-hour time period around the workout itself, which gives you the ability to position your meals in a way that best suits your lifestyle. So if you prefer to train fasted, you can certainly train fasted. Then it might make sense to get a protein serving sooner after that weight training session. If you've had food earlier in the day, particularly within the few hours before you weight train, you've got some time afterwards that you can wait until you get your next protein serving. And this gives people the ability to set up their nutrition in a way that best fits their lifestyle and cuts some of that stress that they may have had before of having to force meals in when maybe they wouldn't have wanted it. So this is a good thing because it gives us some autonomy in the way that we choose how to set up our nutrition.
I think one of the biggest mistakes and fears that people have when it comes to like building muscle is quote unquote bulking up and not gaining body fat, like that fear. But yet so many people do it. They call it like a dirty bulk. People just overeat, whatever you want to call it. Um, how can people avoid like gaining body fat when trying to bulk or put on lean mass?
So if we want to maximize building lean muscle, the research is pretty clear that being in a calorie surplus is probably necessary. So we realize that yes, we can still build muscle in some cases in a calorie deficit. If you are brand new to training, if you are obese, if you are coming back from a long layoff from an injury or med school or whatever that might prevent you from training for long periods of time, or if you are on anabolic steroids, you can certainly gain significant amounts of muscle in a calorie deficit. Outside of those, it can happen. It's just not as fast as people want. And so if you're looking to maximize lean muscle gain, you want to do it at least, you want to attempt to do it at least at maintenance, but optimally in a calorie surplus. When we were talking before about where should we go if we're trying to build lean muscle, and I said if you're a man that's significantly over 20% body fat, if you're a woman significantly over 30% body fat, that's where we probably should be losing a little bit of body fat for optimal health overall. But if you're within 10 to 20% for a man, if you're within the range of 20 to 30% for a woman, going into a calorie surplus to maximize lean muscle gain is probably a smart thing. To prevent as much body fat accrual as we can and to gain as much muscle as we can, the best thing that you can possibly do is monitor your rate of gain during a lean muscle building phase. And if you're within those body fat ranges that I suggested, I would say a person that is a beginner should shoot to gain about 2% of total body weight over a month. Intermediate should be able to gain about 1% of total body weight over a month. And advanced people should shoot for about 0.5%. And if you're in these rates of gain, you are likely gaining as best as you possibly can lean muscle and minimizing the total amount of fat gain. Because, like you said, one of the issues that we run into is that there was traditionally this thing where people were doing these dirty bulks and they were just trying to gain as much weight as they possibly could over certain periods of time. And they were doing it by eating massive amounts of what's considered traditional junk foods. I mean, just tons of pizza, tons of whole milk, tons of, donuts, all of these different things that these people were doing. And I think that what general population is missing in that is that a lot of these guys that were doing this, professional bodybuilders, were on things like exogenous insulin, HGH, things that help to regulate your body's ability to shuttle these calories into lean muscle tissue into places that you want it and prevent some of that excess body fat gain. But these shifts in natural athletes are probably not what we should be looking for if we're trying to optimize this process. You probably can't handle it at the same extent as somebody that's on drugs. And so by monitoring rate of gain, we can focus on gaining as much lean muscle as possible with as little body fat as possible and doing this in an efficient manner. And I think that having those percentages of the amount of gains can be beneficial for people because it can give you some insight into whether or not you're progressing in a proper manner. Because the reality is when we start to gain weight, particularly for people whose goal is ultimately to be leaner, it can make people a little bit gun shy. And so by having this guideline, you can gain without all of the stress associated with putting on a little bit of weight.
So do you think that what separates people from building lean mass versus the person who just never makes progress, even though they've tried for years, is that the person who makes the progress is dialed in, they have a coach, they're using the right intensity, and they're eating in a slight surplus versus under eating? Like, did I miss anything there? Or would you say that those are the three main things that separate the people who actually build mass, lean mass, versus people who just try and never can get it done?
I think that the biggest issue is that they just don't do it long enough. They don't do it long enough with enough consistency. Most people get really frustrated at about the 2 or 3 month mark, and it really takes a lot longer than that to build significant lean mass, particularly for natural people. When you're first starting out, if you've got decent genetics, I mean, people talk about that whole newbie gains time period, and you can certainly build some significant lean muscle in a few months in the very beginning. Once you're outside of that beginner stage, it's a grueling process. And this is one of the reasons that I talk about these building phases with clients and online, because mentally and emotionally, I think that this is a lot harder than losing body fat, at least from my experience with lots of clients. Clients tend to struggle more with building lean muscle than they do with losing body fat. The reason being, when you're attempting to lose body fat, one, that's really what everybody just wants to see. They want to be able to see, okay, well, I'm getting beach ready. When you look at progress in a body fat loss phase, you can distinctly see progress every 2 or 3 weeks. I mean, you can watch the scale drop. When you're trying to build lean muscle, all people see when the scale goes up is, oh, I'm getting fatter, I'm getting fluffy. And this can be very demotivating. Whereas the fat loss process is typically very motivating every step of the way. The muscle building process is not. Most of the time, people feel like they are moving farther away from their goal far before they feel like it's making a positive benefit. Because even if you're building muscle as optimally as you possibly can, you are probably putting on a little bit of body fat at the same time. That's just the way that it is when you're in a calorie surplus. There's no way to only put on lean muscle. And so when people are on this process, they will often feel like they look worse before they look better. They'll have these little bits of body fat covering up some of that muscle that they're building. So visually, they look less impressive. They feel bloated. They feel fluffy. They feel, oh, this is not where I want to go. Even if the large majority of people should probably spend 8 to 16 months building muscle before considering losing body fat. And I actually believe that. I think that most people should spend that much time building muscle, a consistent, adherent process to building muscle before considering losing body fat. That can be super demotivating for people, because when they hear, oh, well, it might be 16 months before I get to look exactly like I want to look, that sucks.
It
But it's
does.
the
Yeah.
fastest way to get to where you want to be. And it's probably the healthiest way to get to where you want to be. If you're, a person that is not obese, especially people that have that skinny fat body type, if you're skinny fat, the answer is not lose fat. It's just not. Because what's going to end up happening is, as you lose body fat, you're just going to end up looking gaunt. And because you don't have the lean muscle to give your body the shape that you're looking for, you don't have the lean muscle to sustain a fat loss journey with any kind of decent amount of calories in play. I mean, you just end up eating nothing. And so these people think, oh, if I just lose body fat, then I'll finally be happy. And then they start losing body fat and they find, oh, the first 2 or 3 months, they're super happy because they're losing weight on the scale. And as we know, that's probably the only sign of success that people care about when they first start out on a fitness journey. They get to the point where they eventually feel like they stall out. And they stall out because all of a sudden, especially in smaller people, women in general, you're at that point where you're eating like 900 or 1,000 calories. And you're like, why am I so lethargic? Why do I feel so bad? Why can't I sleep? Why am I getting into parts where like I have like amenorrhea? And it's because you don't have the lean muscle underneath to have that higher resting metabolic rate. You don't have the lean muscle underneath to give your body that shape. You don't have the lean muscle underneath to burn more calories when you're doing activities. And so this process of maybe we should build muscle for probably a lot longer than you think when we first start out is very frustrating for people. And it's great, especially for women. Over the past 10 years, we've seen a big shift where women have started to value based on, in comparison to what they've traditionally valued. They're starting to value building lean muscle a lot more than before. And we probably have things like Instagram and CrossFit to thank for this, because we're seeing a lot of people that are very fit and women are looking to them and saying, hey, that's exactly what I want to look like. And people are becoming more educated on the benefits of having lean muscle. So we're getting this mental buy-in to building lean muscle. But unfortunately, especially for people, my age and older, I mean, in your 40s and older, We have been so conditioned to only value drops on the scale or being skinny as the process to get to where we want to be, that even though we say, hey, I want to have that fit athletic look, we're not mentally dialed into the process to get there. So these people are saying, yeah, I want that look, but they're not willing to do what it takes to get there. And I want to bring this up, not to say, hey, everything that you think is wrong, but to say, hey, look, realize that you grew up in the era of, to get to where you want to be, you have to do what Kate Moss did and just not eat. But if your goal is just seeing drops on the scale, what you're going to end up is having that crack model booty and not the peach booty that you're going for. So maybe we need to take a different path to get to the answer that we're trying to achieve. And maybe it's not the path that you thought that you should take, but maybe the reason that you haven't gotten there is because you haven't done this before. And hopefully that can resonate with some people, because maybe we can break that diet roller coaster cycle. Maybe we can get people to start to focus on performance as their sign of progress. Because if you focus on performance as your sign of progress, you're going to be successful. If you can start to look at things and say, hey, can I increase my weight every few weeks? Can I value feeling strong? Can I value my performance increases in, my run splits, my rowing splits? The physique will come. It's just not the focus that you probably thought that you should have when you first start. And that's seeing the progress photos change dramatically very fast. That's seeing drops on the scale. I mean, this whole the biggest loser mindset is really not productive in real life. And even the people that were on the biggest loser that lost these massive amounts of weight in short periods of time, most of them regained the weight. And that's because of unsustainable practices. That's because of not focusing on these things that will make this sustainable long term. And building lean muscle is one of those things. So we're fighting decades of conditioning in people that aren't really young and in their 20s. Everybody that's older than that, we're fighting this whole societal pressure to just be lean and skinny. And realizing that it takes some time to get there can be very frustrating.
Speaking of frustration, I think that people get frustrated when when they ask somebody like yourself, like, what's the best training split? And you're like, well, it all depends on a few things, right? Which makes sense as an answer, but people want like the blueprint. Generally speaking, like, what's the go-to training split for somebody that's committed? They have the time to put in at least 2 to 3 days a week. What's the ideal training split for getting lean?
Well, 2 to 3 days a week, that's about a minimum that you want to put in. So, I mean, the sweet spot for me when I'm talking to people is 3 to 4 days is probably, if you can, if it's sustainable, 3 to 4 days are probably great. 4 days is probably the sweet spot where you can make really good programs that are optimized for progress. 3 days is great. 2 days can work too. But if we can get up to 4, certainly do that. When we look at programming for these types of things, what you just said is very true. There's a lot of ways to get there. If you follow some core principles and you understand programming, you can set up programming in a way to fit a lot of splits. I mean, 2 days a week, I would be doing full body, both days, just no question there. 3 days a week, you can do full body. You could do like an upper lower full body. You could do an upper lower accessory. You can do a push pull accessory. 4 days, you can do a push pull. You can do an upper lower. You can do a variety of these different things. All of these work. The important things are making sure that your intensity is close to failure on your working sets. And I mean, literally from the first working set. If you are not feeling a little bit gassed on the first exercise, first working set, then that was just another warm up. So that's one of the main things to change. Then if we're really trying to maximize our progress, we want to be in a proper volume. And proper volume for people based on the current level of research is between 10 and 20 working sets per muscle group per week. Are you going to be able to hit that in 2 days? Probably not. So do the best that you possibly can, because even low amounts of volume can see progress. Is it optimized? Probably not, but that's okay because you're doing the best that you can do. And any improvements can be a step in the right direction. What you have to realize when we talk about 10 to 20 working sets per muscle group per week, when I say this, and in the past, I used to say this with no clarification, and then I was getting questions from people in the comments section, and they would write their own programs and they would send it to me, and they're like, how does this look? And it would involve ungodly amounts of volume because they were trying to hit 20 working sets per muscle group per week, literally the highest possible. When we look at the research, when we say 10 to 20 working sets per muscle group per week, those include fractional sets. The research doesn't count just straight sets for these numbers. And this is very confusing for a lot of people. Fractional sets mean that when a primary mover is the muscle group that's a primary mover counts as one full set. Secondary movers count as about a half a set. So when we're doing back exercises, say like rows, that would count as a back exercise for the back musculature that it's working, and it would count as half of a bicep set because the biceps are used in those movements as well. Similarly, if we're doing a chest press, it's going to work the pecs, it's going to work half a set of the triceps, probably half a set of the shoulders. If you don't want to count that as a full set, you could count that as a full set for the shoulders. And so what people were doing was they were considering a bench press as only sets for the pecs and not for other muscles. And so we would see 20 sets of chest press, then we would see 20 sets of lateral raise, then we would see 20 sets of, triceps exercises. And those 20 sets of triceps exercises that these people were doing were probably 35 or 40 sets of triceps based on the models that they're using in this research. And so people were doing 1.5 to 2 times as many exercises as they should be doing. And they're like, man, this really sucks. And I hate spending 2 or 3 hours in the gym. And this is just unsustainable. So when you realize that fractional sets are included in these, and realize that when we say 10 to 20 working sets, that doesn't necessarily mean that 20 working sets is twice as much progress as 10. Somewhere within this range, we see an optimization of return. And you don't have to do 20 working sets on every muscle in every training block. Like maybe you prioritize chest in this training block, maybe you prioritize shoulders in another one. And so these numbers vary. Should we try to shoot for roughly within this range? Yeah, sure. If time is no concern and you've got the ability to program and you're working out 4 days a week so you can get all these things in a timely manner, absolutely do that. That's great. If you're only working 2 or 3 days a week, you're not going to be able to hit these numbers on every muscle group. Don't fret about that. Prioritize muscle groups that you haven't prioritized in future training blocks. That's okay. And so people really use these numbers as something that adds a ton of stress to their life. And so I really want to emphasize that you're not going to get all of this done in one training block. There's not the perfect split. If there was, I would sell it. I would put it up in a program and I would be like, this is $9.99, buy this. And I would sell thousands of them. And that would be wonderful. And I wouldn't feel bad about it because it'd be the perfect split. But, we have this nuance in programming. And so when people are looking to make these programs, really understanding what the research says is important, because then that can prevent you from wasting time trying to make the perfect split when you're never going to do that. And so you realize that over time, having a variety of splits, not necessarily splits, but having a variety of different workout programs in play will cover all of these needs. It's just not going to be done in that acute 6-week, 12-week, 16-week time frame that a single training block will be, right? And so we even get into the conversations where people look at these really ultra high volume programs, more than 20 working sets per muscle group per week. And the research does show that we have not found a ceiling. As you continue to go up in volume, it seems, based on current research, that it gives further and further progress. But above 18 or 20 sets, depending on what study you look at, the diminishing returns kick in really badly. And what that means is if we're getting 18 to 20 working sets, somewhere between that 10 and 18 or 10 and 20 working sets, we're getting about 97% of the progress that we're going to get. And we see people go up to like 40 working sets and maybe only get like 2% more progress. And so the question becomes, especially for the average person, I mean, sure, if you're a professional bodybuilder, you should probably do more than 20 working sets per muscle group per week because that's your job, and you're stepping on stage and you're competing in something that's very different than what the average person is doing. Even for me, going above 20 working sets per muscle group per week. And I do this as a living. I'm not doing that, because you're cutting away from all that time that you could be preparing food, that you could be doing your actual job, that you could be spending with your time with your kids or your spouse, that you could be doing these other things that bring quality to your life. And so I really emphasize that when we talk about these types of things and you're trying to make change in your life, it's like filling a basket. You want to use the big rocks. Hitting 10 to 20, 10 to 18 working sets per muscle group per week is a big rock. Going above that is not a big rock. You're essentially probably wasting your time, or at least taking your time away from something that could make a change, such as actually meal prepping, which a lot of people don't do.
Speaking of meal prep, how should somebody's diet change if their goal is to gain muscle without gaining body fat? We will get you back to this episode of the Adversity Advantage in just 1 second, but first, I want to give a quick shout out to today's sponsor, Timeline Nutrition. Some of my main priorities right now are optimizing my health, wellness, and longevity. And as many of you know, I've been a fan of Timeline Nutrition and MitoPure for a really long time, especially these new longevity gummies. And right now, Timeline has a special offer that you can get 20% off your first Timeline purchase. And there's never been a better time to experience the benefits of MitoPure. And if you use my code Doug at checkout, you will receive 20% off today. If you've been thinking about trying Timeline, this is your sign. Once again, they're offering my audience a 20% discount on all first-time purchases. So use code Doug at checkout to get 20% off, or go to timeline.com/Doug to get 20% off. Again, timeline.com/Doug to get 20% off your first purchase of MitoPure and Timeline Nutrition. Now back to the show.
The majority of people should probably be upping their protein. When we look at protein intakes for the average person, they're abysmally low. And protein is interesting because this has been one of those contentious points these days, because initially, especially in the 80s and 90s, bodybuilders had started pushing these massive protein intakes. And so researchers started to look at, okay, well, what's the optimal protein intake for return in lean muscle building? And how can we give some people some guidelines? And based off of current research, I would recommend anywhere between 0.72 grams of protein daily per pound of body weight and 1.45 or 1.5. When we see researchers talk about this, you're going to see a lot of different recommendations. And many people will look at what I just said there and say, wow, that's really high to say 1.45 grams based off of current research. But I would suggest that when we look at the breadth of research, it's nuanced depending on who we're talking to. When we're talking about just building lean muscle, and we're talking about the protein amounts that maximize lean muscle building, anywhere between 0.72 and 1 gram of protein daily per pound of body weight in the non-obese seems to work just fine. Protein needs might increase to some of those higher levels when we're talking about people in significant calorie deficits, because it can help prevent lean muscle loss. When we're talking about older individuals that have anabolic resistance, when we're talking about people that have a large amount of lean muscle mass, because remember, these studies are done in mostly Gen Pop or intermediate lifters. And so what we may find is that in more advanced bodybuilders, we have increased protein needs to maintain lean muscle or to build lean muscle. And even when we look at correlative data in bodybuilders, people that win these bodybuilding competitions, if you're trying to maximize the body composition that you have, they're not below 1 gram per pound of body weight. They're significantly above in almost every case if you look at top 5 for the bodybuilders. And so in these extreme cases, when we're trying to really make a huge difference and we're trying to really maximize our return, some higher levels are probably necessary for body composition itself, not necessarily to maximize lean muscle building. Because as I said, when you're in a calorie surplus, protein needs probably go down because there is less of a catabolic stimulus. There's less chance of losing lean muscle. And so you can prioritize some of those calories more towards things like carbs, which probably help more at that point than proteins. And even in the situations that we were talking about before, body recomposition, building lean muscle at the same time as losing body fat, we see that tend to happen better at higher calorie intakes rather than these baseline floors of the 0.72 grams. So the answer is nuanced, and it depends on what you're trying to achieve, what your current body fat levels are, your current level of experience, and probably your age range. So it's a more nuanced conversation than some of the things that we've been hearing online, and it depends. So when people say, "Hey, 0.72 grams or 1.6 gram per kilogram is all you need," yes and no. So it depends, and that's unfortunately the answer with a lot of fitness and nutrition.
You brought up protein, and over the years, calorie counting has been a hot topic. I think, in a way, it can be less important when it comes to building muscle because, I mean, the theory is, I mean, you're trying to bulk up. I mean, don't be as like crazy about it. Just make sure that you're like eating, certain targets of food, etc. Do you think that people need to count macros or track calories to get the results we're talking about, or do you think it can be a bit of overkill?
I think that if you're trying to make significant changes to your body and you're trying to maximize return, you need to track your food in some way. 100%. Can you do it without tracking? Yeah, everybody has a chance to do it. But if you're trying to gain lean muscle and you're a leaner or smaller individual, then your natural eating patterns are probably not suited to building size. And so when you're in a build, you're probably going to have to force feed yourself a bit. So if you're trying to do it ad libitum, if you're trying to just wing it, you're probably going to undereat. Similarly to obese people when they're trying to lose body fat, if you're trying to go by hunger signaling is not a sign of whether or not you've got an appropriate calorie intake for your goal. Hunger is a different process, and discordant hunger cues are very common. And so, obese people trying to lose body fat, even if losing the body fat is the healthiest thing in the world for them, will experience significant hunger. So it's not a sign that they're doing something correct. And so by doing this ad libitum or essentially winging it, can you get there? Yes, you can. Is it going to be reliable? No, it's not. And what is tracked can be managed. So if you're progressing and you're using something like the recommendations that I had before, like 2% of total body mass gain over a month, 1% for intermediates, 0.5% for advanced. If you're not progressing in the rate that you think that you should be progressing, if you're tracking, you can make changes to that to get to that rate. If you're not tracking, you have no idea what to change. You could potentially think, okay, well, I need to eat more, or okay, I need to eat less, but you won't know how to change that, at least in any distinct manner. So should you track? Yeah, you probably should. If you're maintaining, that's when I get more into the camp of, okay, well, you can learn very readily to maintain, particularly if you've been tracking for a long time, and then track into that maintenance phase for quite a while until you get an idea of what appropriate food volume looks like per day and food choices. Yeah, you could switch away to not tracking. When you want to make distinct change, if you want to do that in a reliable way that allows you to adjust for plateaus, yeah, you probably need to track.
Take off your like research science hat for a moment and put your meathead hat on. Um, what are your top five favorite meathead exercises to build muscle?
I mean, the bread and butter stuff really works. I love French press for triceps. I don't think that anything can beat a barbell curl. I like incline dumbbell bench press for chest. RDLs for glutes and legs. The Romanian deadlift, I think, is a premier exercise for glutes and hamstrings. Hack squat for quads, pull ups for back. I think that you can't go wrong with choosing a bread and butter exercise. The one that you feel works best for you, you feel the most is intuitive for you, that makes you go through the motion that you're trying to achieve, and really gives you motivation to kick the crap out of that musculature, really works. But there's so many good examples of that. But the one thing that I would say is, if it seems like massively new or almost gymnastic in nature that you've seen on Instagram, it's probably one that is not as well established as you think. It's probably not going to give you the return that you think. I mean, people do a lot of off the wall things on Instagram just to make it look new and interesting, when really the bread and butter, consistent core exercises are what are going to give you the most return, and that's why they're the core exercises.
Regarding cardio, that's been debated over the years as far as does it help, does it not help? What are your thoughts on cardio as it pertains to building lean mass?
It's necessary if you want to optimize, particularly higher intensity cardios, because cardio has a complementary effect to building muscle mass. It increases capillary perfusion into musculature, which can aid in building lean muscle. So if you want a healthy cardiovascular system, and I think that if we start to put it into these terms, who would think that having a healthier cardiovascular system wouldn't aid in overall health? I mean, it probably does, and probably more so as far as hypertrophy is related than what we once thought. And I know that people get concerned about things like the interference effect, the idea that doing cardio is going to prevent lean muscle gain. The way that 99% of people do cardio, there's no concern there. In extreme endurance type situations, yeah, it could start to cut into that, but most people aren't training like triathletes. Most people aren't training like marathon runners. And so you spending 20 or 30 minutes jogging or doing sprints, it's not going to affect lean muscle building at all. And if you are concerned about that, the best thing that you could possibly do is spread the cardio 4 to 6 hours away from your weight training session, or even better, do it on an opposite day. So if you're working out 3 or 4 days a week, take 2 days in the later part of the week and do your cardio. That way it gets you staying active throughout the week. You separate that cardio from your weight training session, and you get the best of both worlds.
What's some of the worst advice you see online when it comes to building muscle?
I mean, fasting and ice bathing are probably the two worst things that you could possibly do. Fasting is an interesting topic because there are a lot of proposed benefits to fasting, but for otherwise healthy people, there don't seem to be any benefits specific to fasting. When we look at the research that has calorie equated conditions between a regular continuous diet and fasting, at best, fasting matches the benefits that the continuous diet provides, and at worst, it has less benefits. And I think that people really mistake the fact that um, the benefits that come from fasting are misattributed to the fasting itself and are probably more attributed to the calorie deficit that it creates, the losing of body fat, the reduction in inflammation, the benefits to autophagy, the body fat loss, the weight loss. I mean, these are due to the calorie deficit itself and the loss of body fat, not to the fasting itself. So if you do a standard continuous diet, you will get all of the same benefits. It takes a little bit longer to get there, but at the same time, you will retain more lean muscle. You will potentially build more lean muscle. Fasting has a tendency to deplete the liver of necessary proteins to fight cancers. It lowers IGF-1, which aids lean muscle building. It potentially causes you to become malnourished over extended periods of time. It lowers energy. It lowers performance in the gym. There's just a lot of reasons why you would not do this. And outside of like neurological disorders or certain cancers, I can't really see a reason to fast. I think that it's kind of problematic more than anything else. And I know that a lot of people love doing it because they think, oh, well, I'm going to lower my cancer risk over a lifetime. But people need to realize that trying to upregulate autophagy for that purpose, there are certain cancers that would lower proliferation. There are other cancers that increases proliferation. So you should never fast for that reason unless you're instructed to by a doctor because of a specific type of cancer that you have, because it can make other ones worse. Ice bathing kind of falls into a similar camp to where there are all these benefits that are suggested. But when we look at the actual benefits, it seems to be mostly placebo in effect. And then on top of that, it even seems to lower the adaptations that we get from training. So all these people are going in and they're jumping into a cold tub that they spent $500 to buy, and they're probably lowering the amount of lean muscle that they build. They're probably lowering the strength benefits that they get. They're probably lowering the benefits that they get from cardio for a perceived improvement in recovery. And I say perceived because when we look at the studies that show, okay, well, when we take somebody that trains and ice bathes, does it actually increase performance? And in most cases, the answer is no. It doesn't increase performance the next day, but it just makes people feel better. And it makes you feel better because if you're really sore, blunting pain with cold works. That doesn't mean that it's actually enhancing the recovery process. And so when we look at the mechanisms that are underlying it and what's going on, well, having more blood flow probably causes recovery to improve. And that's why we see things like sauna probably cause the improvements in recovery without the losses in adaptations to training. So if you're going to do anything, get in a warm bath. Don't freeze yourself to death. And I know that people love to feel hardcore by jumping in cold, but you're probably doing more harm than good by doing it. And on top of it, you spent $500 on a cold tub. So it's kind of a double kick in the gut when you look at the entire information surrounding it. And I think that that's why people hold on to it so hardcore, because it makes them feel mentally and emotionally, oh, I'm doing something really hard. But if you want the benefits of icing without the negatives, go do 10 minutes of cardio instead and get more benefits than the icing provides. That's hard too. But people don't necessarily love doing that. They like sitting in the cold tub because I think it just feels easier and they've been told that it has all these benefits. And when you spend a significant amount of money on something like a cold tub, you don't want to learn that you just spent that money for no reason. And so people really latch on hardcore to these types of things. And unfortunately, both things like fasting and things like cryotherapy or icing, it's almost become more of a religious type experience than it has been an objective, okay, I'm doing this for real benefits type of thing. So people really get caught up in these things. They hate hearing that they're probably not as beneficial as they once thought, but the research is what it is. And if it starts to trend in a different direction, I'll change my mind. But until it does, the best that we can say is these are probably wastes of your time and you're probably not getting the benefits that you think.
There's a lot of people that use getting lean as some sort of target, summer, wedding, some sort of target date goal, right? What do you say to people that say it's not possible to build muscle and stay lean?
It's certainly possible. And like we've talked about earlier, it's possible. And under those four circumstances that I mentioned, it's probably very significant. When we look at the research talking about building muscle while staying lean, um, a lot of it is genetics driven. A lot of it is driven based off of your sleep, because sleep is very important in this process. Getting more than 8 hours of sleep seems to provide a much better stimulus for maintaining or building lean muscle while also being lean and losing body fat. And so many people are trying to run around with like 6 hours of sleep or 6.5 hours of sleep. And that's probably one of the faster ways to the skinny fat body type. So if you have the right mindset in play, if you keep your calorie deficit modest, if you keep protein high, you're going to have the best chance to do this while in a calorie deficit. But I think that people probably overestimate how quickly they can do this or how significant this can be. So if you're trying to stay as lean as possible, and I'm telling you, hey, 8 months to 16 months or something like that for building in optimal conditions is probably the right expectation. You should expect years to be able to make large changes. And that's just the way that it is. You can do it as long as you are comfortable with that process, but at least have proper expectations when you're doing it. Otherwise, you're going to be really frustrated along the way. And if it's not your first year of training, yeah, it's probably going to take significant amounts of time. And, even starting at like 250 calories below maintenance levels in certain people, and this is probably partly genetics mediated, we see losses in lean muscle. And if you have significant amounts of lean muscle to begin with, you're probably more likely to lose lean muscle. So if you're going to be doing this, at least keep your calorie deficit modest, somewhere between 250 and 500 calories below maintenance, or at maintenance if you're trying to maintain your levels of leanness. But having the right expectations here is probably the number one thing, because I think that people go into this hearing that there's research that says that you can do both at the same time, and they think, okay, good, that's my answer. If it was as dramatic as you're envisioning, literally that's the only thing that anybody would ever do. We would only coach people to do both at the same time, and there would never be any nuance or discussion about this. There would never be any conversations about this. That would be the answer, and that's all we would ever do. Unfortunately, because of the fact that it's not as dramatic as people expect, staging things in a manner where you're in a calorie surplus and then to maintenance or maybe a calorie deficit over time is the right answer because it's probably the fastest way to get there.
What do you think separates people from like staying consistent versus the people that do it for 3 to 6 months and then fall off the wagon?
The conversations that we're having here right now. I
Mhm.
mean, really getting proper expectations in play is probably the most important thing. And I think that when you realize that this is not a 3 month thing, you can start to become more comfortable in the process. When you know the benefits that it provides, the stuff that we talked about in the very beginning of the episode, the all of the signs of progress, starting to value performance over just changes in physique that can make this sustainable long term. And I think really just coming to grips with the fact that, hey, particularly if you're not obese, thinking I'm going to go in and just lose body fat, I'm going on a diet, which is the thing that literally everybody does. That's what gets people moving. To start might not be the right way to go, at least initially, is probably the first step. And maybe this is why you've done diet after diet after diet, year after year after year, ever since you've been like 25 years old. I mean, that's what a lot of people get into that. Every time they get to January, they're like, okay, well, I'm going to go on a diet now. And then come March, they're off the diet and rinse and repeat for the rest of their life. And it's because you haven't accepted the fact that you need to spend some dedicated time building this lean muscle first before you can get there. This is men and women. Nobody is immune to this. This is what we all do because we want to. We get into this one because we feel guilt for what we did from December 24th to January 1st because we're all eating like assholes during that time period. And we got guilt there. And then we want to be ready to at least have some semblance of a physique when we get into a bathing suit come June and July. And maybe instead of viewing this as purely aesthetics wise, maybe we should start to value the performance benefits, the life benefits that come with building.
I'm all about getting rid of excuses on this podcast when it comes to transformation and just giving people the truth. One of the things you hear a lot is it's too late. I'm 45, I'm 51, I'm 38. Like it's just too late. Is it too late for somebody to build a bunch of muscle like after the age of 30?
For anybody that says that it's too late, absolutely not. I mean, you can always progress at any stage in life. And I get people that are 65, 70 years old and they build a lot of lean muscle. Um, and so, especially if you haven't weight trained regularly before, you have a lot of potential to build. And even if you're one of those genetic people that is essentially a hard gainer, because about 25% of the population, there's that bell curve, right? And so there's that middle of the population that gains muscle at a moderate amount. There's that 25% that gains it very quickly. And then there's 25% that seemingly doesn't gain a whole lot at all. Even when they look at that 25% that are considered hard gainers, they still gain. It's not as much as the others. And it's probably overestimated how many people are in that hard gainer territory because it's probably some of the things that we talked about today. They're trying to do it in a big calorie deficit. They're trying to do it without being as close to failure. They're not realizing that they're really far away from failure. They're doing it with just not optimized practices. And that's why when you brought up what would you do as a beginner, I would 100% get a coach because you're probably making not just one small mistake, you're probably making multiple big mistakes on this journey. And that's nothing about you. That you're not an advanced lifter. You don't know all these things. Not everybody knows this stuff. And I see people that are professional bodybuilders all the time that half the things they say they don't know what they're talking about. And they're as good as they are because they have a good coach. And so even though they're spouting off absolute bullshit and you would think that they know the best things possible, they just don't. But they follow their coach's plan and the coach knows what he's doing. And that's why they're a really good professional bodybuilder. And so if a professional bodybuilder can spout bullshit a ton of the time, what do you expect yourself to do as an office worker that has never lifted weights before? You don't know what you're talking about. That's like me going into my mechanic and him being like, you have this problem. And me being like, no, I don't. I don't know what I'm talking about. But that's why you get a professional to help you get there. And I'm very adamant about this type of thing because when I look at my journey, I started when I was 16 years old because I was 6'1", 170 pounds, and I was like, I need to gain some weight for high school sports. Um, I wish that I would have had a good coach. I mean, that was back before the internet was really a thing. And so we didn't have online coaching to where you can get top tier coaches from around the world at the drop of a hat. It's never been easier to get the right plan for you. And so people really need to take advantage of this and start to look at it as an investment and not something that is an expense in their life, because you got two choices here. You can either get a coach and get to progressing, you have a better relationship with food, get off the diet roller coaster, set right expectations, make your life easier, cut out the stress, or you can wing it, just watch videos on YouTube, look up things online and you know, just like when you talk to people in real life, the large majority of the stuff online is not very good in the health and fitness space. It's very generic. It's very without nuance. And we even see that with things like ChatGPT. There are studies looking at ChatGPT kicking out workouts, and they're finding that they're sourcing the majority of their workouts from old muscle and fitness programs. And so they're not made to the person, and they're not necessarily optimized programs. And so people are trying to do these things. And is it better than you as a beginner who's never learned anything before in your life and you're just looking for some answers? Yeah, it 100% is. But is it great? I mean, no. With as much hallucination as we see these AI things put out, it's pretty bad. And I've looked at ChatGPT. I've tested it quite a bit, where I ask it questions that I know the answers to, and it almost without fail gives the wrong answer. And it's really funny. I actually posted about this in my stories probably 3 or 4 weeks ago, where I asked it a question. And I've asked it so many that I don't remember the exact one with this one, but I get the same experience every time I ask health and fitness questions. I'll ask it a question and it'll give me an answer. And I'll say, this is wrong because, and I'll say, and I'll show it the studies. I'll say, even in the studies that you cited, it's wrong because of this. ChatGPT will say, oh, you're right. That is a wrong answer. And so I'll say, why did you give me that answer? And I posted this in my stories because I wanted people to see this. ChatGPT said to me, I wanted to get you the answer fast. If you want an accurate answer, please tell me. What the hell? Like, why? You knew that this answer was wrong. And so the issue with things like AI is people think that it is intelligence. It's not intelligence. It's a dredging bot. And so it searches the internet for answers. The majority of the answers on the internet are probably wrong for health and fitness. So you're getting essentially crowdsourcing from people that don't know what they're doing, and that's the answer that you're getting in some of these things. And so you have to be very, very careful with these things like AI, because it's a very big problem from a like a veracity thing, from a getting the truth of the answers. And unless you are a professional in the space, you don't know what questions to ask it. So these things can be great if it's in your area of expertise, because you can say, hey, look, I'm looking for, answers to this, studies for this. I want you to avoid this answer because of this. Is that accurate? And give it some prompts based on knowledge of the subject. If you don't know anything about the subject, most likely you're probably leading it by accident, or it's pulling from what is the most popular answer online, which is, as we've seen in the health and fitness space, is often a wrong answer, because bullshit claims tend to spread more than the right answers. And the right answers don't spread really well because they're boring. Nobody wants to hear fitness, nutrition, stress relief, sleep as the answer to every question that they have. But the problem is, that's probably the right answer. How do I improve my gut health? How do I get a better physique? How do I improve my longevity? How do I sleep better? How do I have better endurance? It's all the same answers, pretty much. And people hate that because it's not sexy. But if you want the right answers, they're typically not sexy. It's not, you need to stare into direct sunlight for 5 minutes every day. It's not, I need to spend $500 on an ice bath. It's, I need to go do a bench press, and I need to jog for 30 minutes 2 or 3 times a week. Like, people hate those answers. They would much rather hear sit in ice. And I don't know why that is, but that's the reality of the situation. So when you get a coach, when you focus on the mundane, if you can ask yourself, what would a healthy person do in my situation? most of the time you're going to know the answer. Now, you might not know the nuance about it. You might not know the little details, but you're going to know the answer. You're going to know that you should probably be eating more fruits and vegetables. You're going to know you should probably be eating more whole, minimally processed lean meats. You're going to know that you should probably be exercising. You know these things. So if it doesn't pass the what would a healthy person do in my situation test, it's probably not the right answer. And if you ask yourself, what would a healthy person do in my situation? And you think, hey, I should probably not touch receipts because of BPA, you're probably following the wrong podcasts and social media influencers. You're probably majoring in the minor. So it's this is a fun minefield to navigate, but I think that people will generally know the right answer. And if their response to an answer is, "Oh, that makes sense. That doesn't stimulate me emotionally," then it's probably the right answer. If you're like, "Oh my God, that is mind blowing and new, and I can't believe more people are talking about this," that's probably a red flag. Because if it's that off the wall, it's probably either majoring in the minor or it's probably something that's not true to begin with, and people hate hearing that stuff.
Speaking of minefields and perusing through information, we've covered a lot in the last 60 minutes. If somebody's watching this or listening to this and they want to get started today, other than listening to or watching this podcast and taking copious notes, what's the first thing they should do?
I mean, it really depends on their goal. If the first thing that you should do is take your first steps. And, if it's trying to lose body fat, get a little bit more active, ask yourself, how can you eat, a vegetable with each meal? If it's getting stronger or building lean muscle, it's just getting into the gym. You don't have to have the perfect plan, but you do have to take the first steps, and you want to build habits and routines that will support that. So starting that routine of just getting into the gym can be extremely powerful. And if that includes um, just going in for 20 minutes, fooling around on a bench press or a squat, and then going home, that's perfectly fine, because that is building routines that will start to give you the benefits that you want. And everybody starts out that way. And there's never been a single person that has gone in, worked out for 20 minutes, and said that they felt worse afterwards. So just do the little things that you can do in any given day, and you're going to start to build those habits and routines that are going to get you to where you want to be.
Dr. Allan, this has been incredible. Thank you so much for going back on the podcast. If people want to find out more about you, where's the best place to do that?
You can look me up on my website, mauiathletics.com. There are social media links at the bottom of the page, or you can reach out to me on Instagram at Dr. Allan Bacon. Just make sure you spell my first name right. It's Allan. Thank you, Doug, so much for having me on again. It's been a blast. We've covered a lot of really good things, and I hope this can help a lot of people.
My man, thank you so much once again for coming back on. Love the combo, and I'm sure my audience is going to get a lot of takeaways from this as well.
Thanks, man.